Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Quianna Canada. Welcome back to Marco Rubio, Misinformation Tsar. Ladies and gentlemen, in this segment, I'm not going to be doing an inquisition like I did in the segment before. I really want us to think about the historiography of the information that will be spoken about in this segment. Now, it's important to understand before we get into the information that this segment is not in any way it's for information and educational purposes only. It's not to incite hatred or violence against any group. I do understand that I am talking about the past and that this past is uncomfortable to some. So if you find this kind of content uncomfortable, I would urge you not to look at it or to turn it off. But again, this is for educational and informational and historical purposes only. And that's why we're talking about it. To reiterate, this information is not to incite hatred nor violence against any group, whether that's any persons within the United Kingdom or within the United States, here in Belfast. No, this is just so that you understand fully about American history. And I know, to reiterate, that it can be uncomfortable to hear about things that have happened in the past, but we need to sit with the truth. And I think what's unfortunate before we get into the segment and the topic is that the Cuba report doesn't expound on all the groups that have contributed to harm in the United States of America. And I think we could all agree that some groups that are mentioned in the Cuba report, some of those groups that are mentioned in that report are taken out, their activities and their purposes are taken out of context, such as the Freedom Riders of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee of during the Civil Rights Movement. And so I feel that it's my responsibility to put the U.S. back into its proper context and for you to understand the nuances and what is really there. Now, listen, I do understand that you may argue, Quianna, well, this is only about people on the right, or it's about white people. But we do need to keep in mind that during the 1960s, during the 1970s, and even in the slavery era, that enslaved Africans weren't committing any violence, and they were having violence, which is regrettable, meted out onto them. And the Executive Office of the United States, as well as Marco Rubio, they haven't really acknowledged that. Now, I do concede that in the report, there is some contextual analysis to that. But some of the things are taken out of context. It's not supported by footnotes or references. There's no bibliography in the report. And so that is what's deeply concerning to me. Furthermore, ladies and gentlemen, I want to say that my covering these topics is not because I have a connection in any way, shape, form, or fashion to Cuba. I do have a connection to people that have been harmed, and that's people all over the globe. It doesn't matter who you are. If you're a victim of the state and its apparatuses, I do have a soft spot in my heart for you. But the Cuba report is, it's hard not to break it apart because there's just so much misinformation in the report. And so let's go ahead and get into our segment. And this segment, I want to talk about a group that is called Covenant, Sword, and the Arm of the Lord. And when you hear this, you may say, well, Quianna, that sounds like a religious group, something that is not extreme in any way, shape, or fashion, but history says otherwise. The Covenant, the Sword, and the Arm of Lord was formed in the 1970s as a paramilitary survival group near the Arkansas-Missouri border in Marion County, Arkansas. It owns during this time, it owned a 224-acre compound, and they believe that the white race is God's chosen race, and that all other races are what they allege to be inferior. So history tells us that this group stockpiled arms, food, and wilderness survival gear in its location. And they're described by Carrie Noble as an elder and an ordained identity minister, they're described by Carrie Noble, an elder and ordained identity minister, as Christian survivalists who believe in preparing for the ultimate Armageddon, which to me is very frightening. And they also were described as the Second American Revolution. And what we come to understand is that this group, which was a racist group, believed in the seed line identity theory that believed that non-whites were a threat to Christians and the white race. And I think more about this seed line theory exists. And I had to do a little bit of research because I only thought about part of it, but there is like a dual doctrine to this seed line theory. And it alleges that non-whites such as myself have no souls, and therefore it alleges that we cannot earn God's favor. Whoa, what do you think about that? I know that some minorities would be disheartened to learn about that, or maybe find it to be disappointing that they feel that way, but it is true that is what they thought, regrettably. So, Richard Wayne Snell was interviewed. This is a person that was part of the Covenant, the Sword, and the Arms of Lord. He was interviewed at their land in 1893 by journalist Vincent Coppola, who said that Snell called himself one of, quote, God's dragons, end quote. 5 months later, Snell was charged with the unalivement of an Arkansas state trooper named Lewis Bryant. Bryant, an African American, was shot by Snell 11 times during a simple traffic stop. To the violent wings of the far right, Snell is looked upon as, regrettably, a hero and a martyr like Gordon Call and Robert Matthews. Both Snell and Timothy McVeigh were looked upon by the far right as martyrs. We all know who these two people are. They did horrendous things in history and created horrendous acts against national security, and they were looked upon by the far right as martyrs for the cause. And I just think that this was deeply disturbing, that our Secretary of State is not being honest about the history in the United States and how certain groups have contributed as well to the unrest within the U.S. government, within the United States. And I found a very interesting quote from Vincent Coppola, or Coppola, you say Coppola, Vincent Coppola. And Vincent calls the right-wing activists he encountered and interviewed heartland Americans. And he describes their attitudes as this, quote, the men and women he encountered, and I'm going to be paraphrasing, so let me remove that quote. The men and women he encountered imagined themselves besieged patriots, alienated and frustrated at every turn. America, they cried, had drifted from the founding fathers' dreams of a white nation, a white Christian nation. Blacks were defiling the promised land. Life had become bitter. The farms and factories were closing, small towns emptying, the fabric of society shredding. Crime went unpunished, school prayers were unsaid, divorce, abortion, drug abuse, etc. So these were all things that they believed in, believed was truly happening, which, again, when we look at crime, I think that we could look at this through the lens of the transatlantic slave trade and or mass incarceration through the lens of the transatlantic slave trade, because we understand that during the slavery era, Blacks did not have their freedom. The enslaved Africans were not free. And we do understand that the mass incarceration, the prison industrial complex is building upon that legacy of slavery and those institutions which regrettably deny Black people in large proportions their liberties. It's also important to say that many Americans in the United States, have a mugshot. President Trump has a mugshot. A lot of people within the Republican Party have a mugshot and have engaged in criminality. And I think what's regrettable is that groups like the one that we're talking about, the Covenant, Sword, and the Arm of Lord group, they're viewing Blacks as the only persons that have been through the criminal justice system. But in the United States, it's hard not to be a history sheeter. I think that a lot of people within the United States have been arrested. I think that we could all agree on that. And that is not an indication that crime is permissible, because, again, crime is a huge problem in many countries across the world. But I think what we need to acknowledge is that a large percentage of African Americans are set up for crimes through entrapment and set up for crimes that they did not commit and put into jail for crimes that they did not commit, such as what happened to me when I spoke out against my victimization in 2013. And this has happened to many Black Americans, where we are set up for crimes that we do not commit. And so I want to continue, ladies and gentlemen, let's continue with something that I found very interesting. So Richard Clutterbuck, who is a retired British general, gave us a very interesting quote. And if you want to know about him, he taught at Cambridge University. He has contributed to the worldwide understanding of threats against national security through his frequent papers, journal publications, and his books on domestic extremism. And he has developed a theory, the 1% theory, that might be useful in this context. Basically, he believes that most people do not have the emotional stamina to become involved in violent confrontations. And I echo that sentiment. Again, if you watch some of my videos on this channel, and I say, you know what, I don't want confrontation. I don't want to get into confrontations with people here in Belfast. Like, I really want to try and avoid confrontations. But what's regrettable is we know that intelligence agencies will try and create an atmosphere in an environment where you are faced with confrontation so that they can try and blame you as the perpetrator instead of the victim. But I agree with Clutterbuck that, yeah, most Americans like myself, we don't want to be in confrontations. Like, we want to like steer away from confrontations. And so he states that in practice, there is invariably a mixture in a large proportion of the people, usually a majority, who have no wish to get involved and will conform to the dictates of either side if expressed by a person who is violent, such as an intelligence agency, right? Like, they commit violence all the time. Probably a fair average is that only 1% of people feel strongly enough to wish to risk their own lives in support of either the guerrillas or the government. And I think in this context, Clutterbuck is talking about like people that are serving in the military or people that are being drafted. I think that's what he's talking about in this context. Another 10% may have sufficient preference to follow the lead of the activists on the other side, on either side, while as many as 80% will do their utmost to keep themselves, their families, and their communities out of conflicts. As many as 80%. So that's people like you and me. We fall into that category. We will do anything that we can to stay out of conflict. Whereas only 1%, he argues, thrust themselves into violent activity. And I think that he points to, when he's talking about this 1%, he's acknowledging that the Ku Klux Klan fell within this 1%. So we all know about the Ku Klux Klan in the United States and their disturbing history. I don't think that we need to review that in this video. Perhaps we'll do it in another. But when he was talking about this, he was talking about, in part, the Ku Klux Klan. And there's another quote that I found to be interesting, is from Darryl Paulson. And Darryl is a political scientist who studied the Florida Ku Klux Klan in 1978. And he had this to say: the Klan still poses the potential for, they still possess the potential for a resurgence similar to that which it experienced in the 1920s and in the 1950s. This resurgence would depend on the emergence of a dynamic leader to the Klan who might attract thousands of members to the cause, or to the development of a prolonged and regrettably disturbing racial conflict. And this reminds me of that photo that I seen of that Black woman on that bus, and she was surrounded, as we seen, she was on the bus surrounded by Patriot Front men. And it was quite distressing, not only to her, but to other people on that bus. And I'll possibly link that picture to this video, but this reminds me of whether or not Patriot Front in the United States is building upon the legacy of the Ku Klux Klan and what we can do to protect ourselves from this kind of violent extremism. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to end it there and give you something to think about. Do you think that Marco Rubio should be more transparent and open about American history? Do you think that he should include all groups that have played a role and the unrest within the United States, do you think it's time that the United States finally atones for its involvement in the transatlantic slave trade? Do you think that America would be a better place if it acknowledged its history and moved toward a place where it is not propping up people with extremist ideas? Ladies and gentlemen, I had so much hope for the United States and was really trying to root for the United States. Although I am an asylum seeker in the international protection process, I am an American citizen and my heart is close to the United States. That's just something that's not going to change. It's my homeland, it's my country, it's a country that I love. And so it really hurts me that the leader of our nation is choosing a side when he has an opportunity to be impartial and to bring our country together. And the only way that you can do that is by acknowledging that violence is on both sides and not just on one side, because that proposition and that claim can be easily debunked, just as I did in this video and throughout the series. And to reiterate, I think what's regrettable is that I believe that the executive office should be in a position to where it is transparent, impartial, and it is attempting to bring the country together. Now, we understand that many people are arguing that the United States is a failing nation and a failing empire and that it's falling, and that could very well be the case, but what's making it fall even faster is when it chooses to engage in and take the direction that it is taking now. I do understand that Donald Trump is surrounded by people that do have extremist beliefs, which really hurts me that our nation is leading toward that path. But to reiterate, I think what's important is for people like Marco Rubio to really acknowledge that during the 1960s and the 1970s, and even before that, all Black people wanted was their freedom and their rights. And even today, in the words of Viola Davis and her series, we won't, not we, but the US and some other countries won't even give us that. And so we really do need to contemplate on that for a moment, because is the United States such a terrible nation that is refusing to give rights to all people and to acknowledge everyone's right? Now, I do understand that here in Belfast, they are also following in the footsteps of the United States. The United States has given them a script, and they are following within the footsteps of the United States with their anti-Black racism and covert racism. And that really does make me wonder, and that really does hurt my heart because of the history that Belfast carries. And I hope that one day they'll see that the side that they're taking, especially have taken against me, is a very wrong side, and that side is very oppressive. And hopefully one day they'll see that. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to talk to you next time. Bye-bye.